as they say.
Okay.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to CoachX Live with the Institute of Coaching. My name is Jeffrey Hull, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute, and I am thrilled to be here once again. We have a returning guest, which is rare, so that means she's very special. Dear friend of the Institute and of mine, Amii Barnard-Bahn, is here to talk about how to deliver bad news. Not that anyone wants to do that, but it is something that comes up a lot in coaching, how to help our leaders that we work with as coaches become more effective in, I would say, limiting the fallout, limiting the negative repercussions, and if possible, maybe turning something that appears at first to be negative into a positive. So she is definitely an expert in the space, and we want to welcome her here today with me. I also want to welcome everyone. Let me see if the comments are starting to work. Austin, my tech whiz, is going to start getting them flowing, and I want to welcome you from wherever you are around the world. Hopefully you'll come in and say hello, and I'll start to see them soon, but I'm not seeing them yet. Anyway, while we're waiting for the comments to start coming in, let me give you a little bit of Amii's background if you're not familiar with her. Hold on one second while I pull it up. But Amii Barnard-Bahn is, as I mentioned, a dear friend of the Institute of Coaching. She's a fellow with the Institute. She's also a C-suite coach, business ethics attorney. She's a very well-known keynote speaker and a best-selling author. She's most known, I think, for her wonderful Promotability Index assessment and the Guidebook that we talked about last time that people use to really have a sense, whether with a coach or without a coach, of what they need to do to build their skill set and become promotable in today's world. She's a former Fortune 50 executive. She's the CEO of Barnard-Bahn Coaching and Consulting and a law firm partner at Kaplan & Walker LLP, really an expert on compliance and ethics. And she has this new article out and resource available on Harvard Business Review that we talked about. And I was just really intrigued and felt like it was important to bring to our LinkedIn public because, as I said earlier, these topics of how to deliver challenging or potentially bad news in a way that works effectively is a real skill. And so she's put together a 6-point or a 6-step process to work through. She's looked at some of the neuroscience research that backs up why this can work effectively. So I'm really excited to have Amii with us here today. And I'm seeing that people are coming in. So hello to Richard and Maria Augusta coming in from France, Vermont, Macedonia. Is it Macedonia?
I think it's Macedonia.
Macedonia, sorry about that. Anyway, welcome everyone, and be thinking about questions that we can grab to ask Amii. So thank you, Amii, for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to share this with a group of coaches that I admire and respect so much. I love the Harvard Institute of Coaching, and so it's wonderful to get to share this research around other people who can use it with their clients is my hope. So
I have to ask you to start. So what prompted this topic? Did something happen that made you think about it, or?
Well, so I have an exceptional exposure to people delivering bad news, whether it's being an employment litigator early in my career, being an in-house HR executive, including a CHRO, being a compliance and ethics executive at McKesson, being responsible for implementing 3 anonymous reporting helplines.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And overseeing investigations. And then now as a coach, coaching CEOs and C-suite executives who have to manage a lot of balls in the air, including their relationships, including doing the right thing. And so all of my work really ties together in terms of doing the right thing. And then I'm a partner in a compliance and ethics law firm. So we help assess programs and, give people advice on how to do these things well. And so I'm very fascinated by the social science research that's been done and bringing practical solution, science-based practical solutions for us as coaches, as well as my clients and people in the corporate world, on how do we deliver bad news, because it's a pernicious problem. You can just look at the headlines and see people that should have spoken up earlier and didn't, or they were retaliated against, they were shut down, they were frozen out, they lost their jobs. The life experience of whistleblowers is pretty horrible, and the rate of suicide is high. So, and divorce and all kinds of things. So we know from social science research that bad news events affect us 5 times stronger than good ones, right? They really stick with us. And so we aren't programmed to want to receive bad news. None of us, including myself, even though I know, all, right? We're human. And unfortunately, it's just the way our lizard brain works. And so further studies, I got really fascinated. I read a study that was done in 2019 in the Journal of Psychology, around 11 studies that had been done on delivering bad news. And it had some really shocking and important outcomes that I leveraged for, at first, an article in Fast Company. And then I worked on the research for a couple more years, interviewing people, looking at the practical applications of how we could use this social science research on essentially retaliation or shutting people down to our advantage. And that's where I came up with the 6-step process and published it in the University of Pittsburgh Leader to Leader journal, because I wanted C-suite executives and CEOs to also see this and be aware of this phenomenon. So my goal, my mission, is to equip both bad news messengers and the people receiving them, so that, because if both sides know, okay, this is a hard thing we're going to be doing here, I think we'll do it better. And my hope is that it'll be enabling for people to speak truth to power. CEOs and people in power will get a bigger funnel of information, because we know the higher you get, the less information you get. That's not always good. And there are CEOs who do want to know all the data to make the best decisions. They need that. Stockholders need it. Shareholders need it. Society needs it. So that's a bit of the background.
That's great. I think it's particularly relevant in today's social media environment too, where things get so completely out of control and expand beyond that. All it takes is one false step along the way. And even though the leader may be super well-intentioned, the ripple effect of someone who's really hurt, who feels like they were really wronged, or, something was done inappropriately, or some kind of email was sent. We've seen those examples where even with the best of intentions, all it takes is someone to stick it on the wrong social media and it becomes, viral. And then all of the best work of the leader kind of goes down the drain. So, doing these steps and really taking it thoughtfully, taking this process both as a personal responsibility as a leader, but also keeping in mind, as you said, that we are emotional beings, that you can have all the data, you can have all the numbers, you can say, this is not personal and this is just because of this number or that number. But at the end of the day, it's really a personal experience to try to integrate something that doesn't go isn't what you wanted to hear. And so being skilled at that in a way that doesn't lead to this kind of fallout is really crucial. So why don't we jump? Well, let's jump in. We have a limited amount of time and I would love to get some questions. So share with us your research and then we'll dig in.
So the research that was done by some wonderful social science and psychologist behaviors was that bad news messengers are not only deemed unlikable and less competent, malevolence is ascribed to them, that they actually wanted the bad event to happen, even if potentially they're just the messenger and they didn't actually directly have any action or control over the situation. Because as people, we are meaning makers. And so we unfairly transfer ill intent to the messenger due to our human need to make meaning of random information.
Okay.
It's interesting. So we may even believe that the messenger wanted it to happen. And people who are in what I'll call bad news delivery frequency roles, which tend to be compliance officers, general counsel, heads of HR, CFOs, people who I coach regularly are even more at risk because they can be viewed as having chosen a profession that is anti-social norm.
Wow.
So they're at extra risk. Makes sense?
Yeah.
So, so this adds to the sense of blame, that, we chose our profession, we chose our fate, this is just kind of what happens. And I think some of us in this role experience that, that's a hump that I help people get over in my coaching as well. So we have to get better at this, giving and receiving bad news. And there's a real art and skill to doing this well. You can see examples, I think, in the media and around, but I wanted to give some people a really simple process to follow. And I have an infographic that I know we didn't get up in time, but I'll put a link in the comments after our episode so people can access it.
That's great.
So I interviewed dozens of clients and other people to understand their experience and their bad news stories. What went well, what didn't go well. And it also made for a lot more interesting way to learn. As we know, storytelling is a great way to make things more memorable. Right. And so in the Leader to Leader journal, which Wiley gave me a link to bypass their paywall. So I'll also put that in the chat. Or if you all have that, you could do it too. So I'll run through the steps briefly, and then I'm happy to talk about any one of them that you would like. The first step is to psychologically prepare your audience. The second step is to rehearse confident delivery. The third is to be present and fully focused. The fourth is to convey benevolent, proactive intent. That one's really important and maybe fun for us to talk about. The fifth one is to explain without justifying. And then the sixth one, which comes into account when we really do need a change to happen, when the bad news is significant and requires an action, we actually need to add a sense of urgency. You had said something earlier, so a slight modification. We don't want it to come off as positive if it's something that needs to change. As we know from John Kotter and his 8 steps to change management, the number one most important thing for change is we have to create that sense of urgency. And as bad news messengers, we're really tempted to downplay the significance. When we're on the hot seat, we're very tempted to downplay, oh, it's not that bad, actually, but if it is, you got to resist that. And you got to say, and we need to act on this now to prevent it happening in the future, and we need to act on this now to stem the bloodshed, whatever it is. So that's another part of this system is to resist that temptation.
I think one of the things that jumps out at me is, when you talk about benevolence and then you talk about intent and you talk about practice, almost like rehearsing and being thoughtful at the beginning, the challenge in that is that for many leaders, that at least the ones I've worked with, they want to get this over with as quickly as possible. And they will typically not take a lot of time to prep. They will have the data. So it's like, let me show here's the reason why we're losing money. And here's the reason why we have to lay off X amount of people. Thank you very much. On to the next thing. So what are the nuanced ways to maybe convince leaders to take that extra time, to be present, to be...
Preparation is really critical whenever you have the opportunity. I appreciate that sometimes there's an urgency, but I would honestly, there's always 2 minutes to prepare and put your bullet points together, get your game face on, really understand how you want to come across, and plan ahead. You do not want to be reactive. You want to be, audience focused, not me focused. You don't want to have fear driving you to do this really well. So that requires, I think, a bit of situating yourself in a centered way. You want to provide advance warning to psychologically prepare yourself. There's studies that have been done that when we are shocked, we literally freeze for 1/25th of a second. If you've ever stopped short. So when you're walking with someone and they say, well, I'm getting a divorce, and you might stop walking. You're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Right. So that happens too when we're delivering
Mm.
bad news. You want to prepare someone so that their ears are open and not in a shocked way. When you shock them, they are already on alert. Their lizard brain is triggered. You don't want that. You're not going to get the best response from them.
Well, it's interesting because we already have a question from Brittany, which is what I was going to ask you anyway. So thank you, Brittany. She's asking about offering a solution
Mhm.
when at the same time you're delivering bad news. Now, my immediate thought, and that's why I was going to ask you about it, is if you are delivering like this isn't working or we need you to leave and move on. And I've thought about how I can help you or something like that. Is that a good thing to do? To be or not?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to walk through the 6 steps briefly and then
Okay,
answer the question if that's okay, because I do think,
sure.
yes, that is a part in one of the steps. And these can be adapted,
Right,
Brittany. So, depending on your situation, you can pick and choose. And everyone on this call can tell, I think, which steps would work for them.
right,
It depends on the gravity of the situation, your relationship. Is the person, are you speaking to someone with higher authority and power than you, or is it an even? All of those things are going to factor into this
right,
advice.
right,
So the first thing I would say is, psychologically prepare. It just can just be a beat. It's just, I've got some bad news, or um, I wish I had better news is another one that I usually would start with, like with reporting to a board or talking to someone. That gives someone just a beat to set context and be like, okay, I'm about to hear something that isn't positive, and they prepare themselves.
okay,
Um, and you can calibrate expectations by setting context for the bad news. How long will it last? What's the estimated cost? What needs to change? Rehearsing delivery is the second step. I am amazed at how many executives do not prepare for important meetings. It's shocking, actually. Um, I always spend a half hour prepping before board meetings, before executive team meetings, especially when I was presenting, of course, but rehearsing delivery, so that you get your awkward turns of phrase out, or you get any guilt if you had any hand, if you're firing someone and you feel bad about it. I'm not saying you want to be inhuman, but you want to be fully present for the other person, right? Not be focusing on your sadness. We've seen some CEOs who have gone online crying about how they're
right,
letting 4,000 people go, and people get pretty angry about that. They're like, "That's very nice that you're crying. I'm the one that's losing my job." So you want to be focused on other people.
right.
It allows you to project confidence, humility, and gravitas depending on the news you're delivering. I always recommend that when you have time to practice, especially if you're on Zoom, practice 3 times, record yourself. It's so easy, on your phone, watch it once with the sound off so you can see your body language.
Oh, that's a
Once,
great suggestion.
yeah,
Yeah,
once with only the sound. Listen to, like, close your eyes and really focus on, what am I hearing? Is this an empathetic person? Is this someone that I trust? You can really hear how you're coming across. And the third time, watch it all together. And I guarantee you will get feedback that will help you do this better.
I really
Um,
appreciate that because I think people are generally, especially leaders. I mean, coaches may be more sensitized, but in general, leaders are not aware of how their body language
yes.
says so much more than the actual words, right?
Yes. Yes. And rushing shows disrespect, right? Again, that's why practicing getting centered is so important. The third step is being fully present, and again, that being centered, which I think coaches are very good at. You want to do face to face, ideally, when delivering bad news, is the first choice. The method is important for trust. We know this. Video conference is second best, so at least I can see you. I have a physical presence, and we're more and more used to that after COVID, so that's helpful.
Right.
Telephone would be the third. Of course, email is the worst. Email or
Which
Slack or
we've seen CEOs use it
yes, we
though,
have, we have, we have. So
and unfortunately, it tends to
yeah, so
backfire.
there is a prioritization there. You want to reduce the likelihood of misunderstandings and escalations. You be able to clarify any questions the person has in real time as it's happening. So either video conference or in person, or potentially telephone enables you to do that. And some relationships may need shoring up after a crisis. If it's a system-wide crisis, like it's a major issue in the company, like an investigation by a regulatory authority, which I've had several times. You want to circle the wagons. Maybe you tell your CEO first, but then you need a plan to talk to the board, right? Or engage outside counsel. Like you need to be ready with potentially suggestions depending on your role. So I coach my leaders about crisis communication plans because I've done them, and how they need to present their bullet points. I've drafted, communication plans, and I dealt with the hydrocodone epidemic at McKesson when people could not get their pain medication because of the crackdown. So it's very helpful to help people with those things. One of the
I have a specific question that I've seen come up a number of times that I think is complex, and you're probably the right expert to try to thread the needle, which is when you have bad news and you want to be, if you're a leader and you have negative information to share with your team, and you want to be as transparent as possible, but you also don't want to blame, even though you may know that, so you've got 15 people in the room, but a couple of them are more responsible for the negative information than the others. How do you thread that needle without making it come across that, somebody here screwed up, but I still want to tell the whole group about the situation without pointing fingers? In other words, you want to be open and transparent, but if you're totally open and transparent, there may be in the room that feel attacked.
Based on the facts you've given me, I would have a pre-meeting with the two people that were mostly to blame, either one-on-one or together if they were a team.
Right.
And I would talk them through this. I would set expectations. I would talk about the impact of what happened. And then I would plan a separate communication and conversation with the entire team after that.
And would you mention that some of the fault is with their colleagues or with other people, or would you just...
If it was obvious, and or other people could be so anxious or worried that it was them, maybe
that's
they don't
the challenge, right?
Then I would talk in that conversation with the two people that were culpable. I would talk to them about how we should share this with the team. Because I think it's a team problem if it impacts everyone or the reputation of the team. And I would bring them into the solution and find they may go kicking and screaming, but I would say I am going to tell the team. So I will make my own decision ultimately about how to share this. And I would like your input. If you were me, how would you like to share this with our team?
Oh, that's interesting. What about like the survivor guilt? The people that, because when their colleagues get laid off or their colleagues, get the bad news and they're still there. Is there a good way as a leader to minimize, I guess, the fallout?
There is. I mean, there's many things going on. There's Schadenfreude, right? People are upset, but they're also happy it wasn't them. Usually.
Yeah. Or sad for their colleagues.
They're sad for their colleagues. So the best communications I've seen are very transparent around addressing, number one, the reasons for the layoff. I wrote an article about this actually for HBR, 5 biggest mistakes leaders make when communicating layoffs. So we can put that in the chat later as well. The number one is it should never come as a shock. If you've been doing a good job communicating your financial results or losing a big customer, you can tie it to that. It should be tied to something. What led to this, right? So I think in a good organization where there's been transparency about the business circumstances, it shouldn't be a shock. Now, a lot of companies avoid that because they don't want to lose people and they're selfish. So that's unfortunate. But I believe in transparency because that leads to trust and greater retention down the road. With people with survivor guilt, I think the best thing you can do is explain who was let go and why. Explain what you're doing for them. Hopefully there's outplacement. Hopefully you've put a team together to help them get other jobs if you have the resources, and hopefully you do. And and I hope that the CEO is taking a pay cut or putting off their bonus to pay for that, frankly, because that's how you retain and keep your reputation, is by
Yeah, you
doing things like
spread the
that.
pain, right? Make
Yeah, you
sure that
spread
it's
the pain.
equitable.
In companies where during COVID, when there were horrible layoffs, I worked in a med device company. The entire executive team took they had a pay freeze, and they took a 20% pay cut to avoid layoffs. That's what you need to do to keep your reputation and to, walk the walk and not come off like some of these horrible companies where you see how much, the CEO is making. And I just had a situation with a C-suite member where the CEO is not doing that. And my client is very, very upset about it.
Yeah, no, it definitely has its negative reverberation.
Yeah.
So we're going to run out of time, and
Okay.
I want to give you a chance to recap the steps, because I think everybody heard the quick list.
Okay.
But why don't you give it to us again, and as you go along, maybe stop and just
Okay.
mention
And
the
I'll also,
challenging
and then
moments.
I'll post the articles as well,
Okay,
because then you can do a deep dive and
right.
adjust it to whatever your coaching practice is. Provide psychological advance warning, provide a beat, rehearse your delivery wherever possible, be fully present with stakeholders. Convey benevolent intent. We didn't talk about this one as much, so I'll go into this one in a little bit of detail.
That's an interesting one.
Be aware of your audience's bias, or your client, to view them as harboring malevolent motives. And you counteract this by expressing empathy.
Mm.
You relate the news back to the achievement of corporate goals, what did or didn't happen, and communicate the path forward. To Brittany's recommendation earlier, yes, you deliver the bad news and you say, and this is so far what we're doing. It either demonstrate how the problem has already been fixed or the efforts underway to prevent recurrence. If you can show people how the change helped the organization, this can emphasize your good intent as a trusted advisor. You can say, well, this wasn't ideal. We are going to pay a cost for this. This is the cost. I wouldn't hide the lead. I wouldn't bury the lead. I would say, this is the cost, and this won't happen again because, or we are taking steps, and this is what we need from you. Giving people a path forward is going to reduce their anxiety. It's going to increase any negative impact you may have had as a trusted advisor. And then the fifth step is important. Explain without justifying. We've probably all been in a situation where someone's like, I'm sorry, but it just really wasn't my fault.
Mm.
I don't know about you, but when you're working with CEOs, they really don't want to hear that. It is your fault if it happened on your watch, and if they think that, it's under your
Right.
scope. And
To
so
own the accountability,
it's
basically.
it's part of the job, right? It's why you get paid the big bucks if you're in the C-suite. And it's not fair sometimes, but it happens. And you may need to have your teams back, right? So it's critical to give an adequate accounting of the relevant facts that allows your audience to understand what happened. Done well, your audience perceives you as sincere, trustworthy, and they find your explanation is sufficiently detailed and reasonable. And this is going to lessen the blame ascribed to you by your audience and increases the perception of fairness and legitimacy of the bad news. And then the extra caution, I would say, when change is necessary in the culture, right? Let's say you get hit with a lawsuit like Activision Blizzard for pervasive sexual harassment, horrible treatment of people, right? Lyft. Change needs to happen with that. We don't want to say, this will pass, or we'll just pay the lawyers some money, right? We don't want to do that. So we want to avoid that temptation to reframe bad news as a net positive when there's a big change that needs to happen. We don't want to, overly reconceptualizing bad news as positive can undermine that sense of urgency required to respond adequately to crisis, mend the reputation, maintain public trust and employee trust, and lead change.
Sounds amazing. I mean, if only it was easy.
It's not.
People would do it.
And caveat that I think this is the best. I would love people's thoughts. We have so many amazing experts on this call. I would love additional contacts from everyone on this call. Please reach out to connect with me. My goal is to make this easier for everyone and to reduce the retaliation that can happen in the world, and increase truth to power, increase how we handle bad news, how we deal as a society with difficult issues. So there may be other research out there that can improve this even more. But
This is super helpful. And I
for
think
now,
that the you mentioned benevolence and that people may actually perceive that the messenger is actually malevolent. So maybe you leave us with the sort of some final thoughts to make sure that if you are well-intentioned and you're thinking what's best for the company, but you need to make, some major changes, is there a particular approach that you would use to reinforce that?
I would reinforce the reasons you're bringing it forward. For example, I would say, as you know, it's my role to bring up situation, in my compliance role. I'll step into that for this hypothetical. I'd say it's my role to do this. This is the tough part of my job. Reinforce that the company put you in this role and that this is part of your job. You are there to help. You want to protect the company's reputation. You want to make it profitable so that everyone has a job or you can rehire people at some point, et cetera, that kind of thing. I saw the question about if you begin with, I wish I had better news. It's going to be worse when you shock the person, Stacy. Yes, they're going to be on guard, but if given the choice of just, blowing into someone's room and saying, our financial results are horrible, and I think we're going to need to lay off 10%. I guarantee you it's going to be worse than if you said, how I was looking at our numbers, you asked me to look at how we're doing against our results. I'm afraid it's not looking good. And then you start in with, I guarantee you're going to get better. Having been in, I was in corporate for 20 years. So you're going to get better results. They need a moment. They just need a little moment.
The biggest, we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to have to stop because we could talk for hours. But the biggest takeaway for me and for us as coaches is to really help our clients prepare to be
great
present.
point. That's what we can do as coaches.
And use their core empathy to build trust and to speak the truth and not run away from it. Because as you said, in my role as compliance officer, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, but it's also a role of any leader to do that well.
It is true. And people can be a leader at any level, right?
Exactly. That's right.
At any level we can lead and do the right thing. And those are the people we don't want to get frozen out or, caught up in a rift.
And they need these kinds of skills.
They
so that's
do.
what coaches are helpful at. So this is great. I thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely.
I want to thank all of you for joining us, and you can definitely follow up with Amii, and she's going to post the graphic, and she's available to answer your questions. And definitely go to the Institute of Coaching website. If you're not a member, we'd love to have you join us. We have these talks, we have webinars, we have incredible information available to you, like from people like Amii. So stay in touch, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, Amii.
Thank you. Thanks.
Take care, everyone.